Good evening. I'm Lisa Desjardins. John Yang is away. The assassination of American conservative leader Charlie Kirk is drawing reaction and concern around the world. In London, a massive crowd today, estimated at over 100,000 people, gathered in a march organized by anti-immigration activists who remembered Kirk as part of the event. This as the 22-year-old suspect in the killing is being held without bond, due to appear in court Tuesday. As the investigation into the shooter's motives goes on, Kirk's widow, Erica, spoke for the first time last night, vowing that his movement will not only continue, but will grow.
You have no idea the fire that you have ignited within this wife. The cries of this widow will echo around the world like a battle cry.
Concerns about security for political figures and of political violence in general continue to rise. Cynthia Miller-Idris is the director of the Polarization and Extremism Research Innovation Lab at American University, and she joins me now. Cynthia, looking at the pattern of violence in recent years, what fits into that pattern from this and what might be new?
Well, we've been seeing rising political violence, rising hate-fueled violence for several years now. We're at a level that we haven't seen since the 1970s. And over the last couple of years, in the U.S. in particular, we've seen rising assassination attempts and assassinations as a tactic within that political extremism. And that's also been happening overseas. So, I think it was to be expected that political assassinations would continue if we weren't able to tamp down the rhetoric.
To be expected, to hear those words is really quite stunning, but you are the one doing the research and you're talking about the rhetoric, which is a big part of the conversation right now. How much is rhetoric responsible for political violence, and especially that moment where someone isn't just expressing anger, as we see online everywhere, kind of a toxic culture online? How much does political rhetoric influence someone to move from saying words to doing something violent? Or does it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we'd seen, and I said this a year ago after Trump, the first assassination attempt against President Trump, was that it was only a matter of time with the kind of rhetoric that we see that we were going to get to political assassination. So, that's what I mean by expected. It sounds very cynical, but it was very predictable, shocking but not surprising is the way that I think of it. When you have political rhetoric that consistently positions us versus them in existential terms, when people online are celebrating the assassination of a United Healthcare executive, for example, that kind of violence being valorized, not just seen as a last type of solution, but as an acceptable or even preferable one.
There was also celebration online of this assassination. And at the same time, we also know there are some supporters of Charlie Kirk who are using more and more sort of warlike kind of talk. After a tragedy like this, there are all sorts of ways that people deal with the grief. But where do you think we are right now in the rhetoric about this event?
I think we're at a really very risky moment. I will say that the elected officials' rhetoric, the mostly bipartisan condemnation of the violence and of the idea that no one deserves to be shot, no matter how much you disagree with them, I think has been very clear. But among ordinary people, especially young people on social media, we have seen much more divisive rhetoric, both calling for civil war and celebrating the death of the killing of someone with whom people often vehemently disagreed. And so I think one of the things I've been urging people is to not just look to political leaders for solutions, but look across the dinner table. That's a moment to engage with dialogue and really try to walk back that rhetoric.
One thing I've noticed in the past few days is a rise in conservatives doxing or publishing the personal information of people, individuals who are not remotely famous, who may have, in some cases, celebrated the death of Charlie Kirk, as you said. That's something obviously deplorable to do. But in some cases, maybe not gone that far, just offended some folks. We spoke to someone from Wired magazine who's covering this, talking about specifically this moment.
I've spoken to multiple people this week who have had, their employment terminated as a result of what they posted online. In some cases, they were celebrating Charlie Kirk's death. In other cases, it was much, much less than that, and they were just making points about divisive U.S. society.
This has been not just about shaming people, but about affecting their lives. And in some cases, we know there's been death threats as well. I wonder what you make of this tactic, not just something a few people are doing, but people are collecting databases to do this now.
Yeah, doxing is a very dangerous tactic. We've seen it from the left and from the right. And what we've seen over the years is that often when someone is doxed, their personal information leaked, there have been cases where people show up at the wrong address where they used to live, let's say, and threaten a kind of innocent family who lives there. You're putting at risk family members, children, others who might live at that address. So, one of the things I would really urge people to do is avoid that temptation, whatever the motivation, to look for accountability. This is a moment to allow the rule of law, to allow social media policies to handle that.
In the few seconds we have left here, we've seen these moments in history before where we have assassination attempts happening over a decade or 2 decades kind of thing before. But I wonder, you mentioned people need to talk to each other across the dinner table. What else gets the country out of moments like this?
Well, one of the things we really need is more serious and systematic investments in prevention, which is something that other countries have. We in this country tend to rely on after the fact increases in security, better barricades, better security, detectors, and that's expensive and it requires a perfection every time. But you can also invest in helping people be less persuaded by propaganda online, less persuaded by manipulative efforts that say violence is the solution, and help people know how to recognize warning signs and know where to get more help.
Cynthia Miller Idriss, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.